It's hard to imagine a less contentious or more innocent word than and. But how to interpret this simple combination led to a complex legal battle that reached Supreme Court on October 2, the first day of new term. The judge's decision could affect thousands of prison sentences each year. Federal courts across country have disagreed over whether word used in a bipartisan criminal justice overhaul in 2018 really meant and, or. Even appeals panel that approved longer sentence called structure of sentence confusing. The Supreme Court stepped in to resolve the dispute. This is the kind of task that judges and perhaps English teachers love. The case calls for close examination of a portion of the federal law, the First Step Act, that aims in part to reduce mandatory minimum sentences and give judges more discretion. In particular, the justices will examine the so-called safety valve provision, which aims to spare low-level, nonviolent drug dealers who agree to plead guilty and cooperate with prosecutors from facing often longer mandatory sentences. This is much more than an exercise in diagramming a sentence. Nearly 6,000 people convicted of drug trafficking in 2021 budget year alone are in the pool of people who may qualify for sentence reductions, according to data compiled by U.S. Sentencing Commission. Overall, more than 10,000 people convicted since the law went into effect could be affected, according to Ohio State University Law School sentencing expert Douglas Berman. This provision lists 3 criteria that allow judges to waive mandatory minimum sentences, which mainly take into account the seriousness of previous crimes. Congress didn't make it any easier by writing the section in the negative so that a judge could use discretion in sentencing if a defendant did not have all 3 types of criminal history. The question is how to determine suitability for the safety valve, whether any one of the conditions is sufficient to disqualify someone, or whether all 3 must be unsuitable. Lawyers of prisoner Mark Pulsifer, whose appeal the court will hear, say that all 3 conditions must be valid for a longer sentence to be given. The government says one condition is enough to qualify for the mandatory minimum. Pulsifer pleaded guilty to distributing at least 50 grams of methamphetamine. 2 of 3 conditions applied to Pulsifer, which the trial court and Saint that was enough for St. Louis-based 8th U.S. He was actually sentenced to 12 years in prison for unrelated reasons. Pulsifer, now 61, is not scheduled to be released from prison until 2031. According to Federal Bureau of Prisons records, appellate courts based in Chicago, Cincinnati and New Orleans also ruled against the defendants. Courts in Atlanta, Richmond, Virginia and San Francisco have ruled to expand eligibility for safety valve rebates. In one case in Texas, Nonami Palomares, caught with heroin at the U.S. Mexico border, was given a mandatory 10-year prison stay.